Hi, Andrew from Sachs. I'm getting a lot of interest at the moment in the question of why people are tolerant or intolerant, and it's a valid question to raise. Firstly, there's the moral angle, which is to say that organisations that are more inclusive tend to be better from a social justice point of view, and at a society level, we know when people are inclusive, you end up with less violence and those kinds of things. But in an organisation, you end up with higher levels of well-being and productivity if the climate is considered to be more inclusive. Inclusion climate is the concept that the employees believe that the organisation is of its nature inclusive and welcoming of diversity. But the second component is that organisations that are like this tend to be more commercially successful. There's good, strong research evidence that profit and growth are better under those circumstances. So this video is about 4 pathways to tolerance or intolerance, and it comes from a study that Sachs was involved in 2019 with Deakin University. And these 4 pathways relate to characteristics such as cognitive ability and personality, which are quite heavily genetically determined, but also values, which are largely learned in the course of life. So it has a kind of a nature-nurture component to it, and some really interesting findings. In preparation for this research project, Jeremy Anglin undertook a literature review of the world of tolerance and intolerance and identified 4 potential pathways to intolerance. The social dominance pathway is really the idea that people seek to be dominant over other types of people. So we are superior for some reason to other people who are different from us, and so we would seek to maintain that dominance. The second pathway is the ego threat pathway, which is to say that people are intolerant because they kind of get confronted by their own self-worth, and therefore they seek to put other people down to avoid the risk to their own personal ego. The third pathway is a conservatism pathway, and the idea there is that if people are extremely conservative, they kind of want things to be the way that they were in their youth or some time ago, and so they're seeking to return to a bygone era, if you want to put it that way. And the fourth pathway was a low cognitive complexity pathway, and that's simply saying that people who are not very smart may well think, well, these people are different from us, so they're bad. Now, this data was gathered in a high-stakes environment. These people were applying for jobs, and that makes it very good data, and there were thousands of people involved. And so what we did is that we tested these people, and we tested their inclusion, their attitudes towards diversity as it's known, to identify whether they were tolerant or intolerant in the first case, and then to look at the psychological reasons behind that tolerance or intolerance. First, let's define what we're talking about in each of these areas. Cognitive ability. Cognitive ability has 3 main components: verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, and abstract reasoning. Verbal reasoning is about words, numerical reasoning is about numbers, and abstract reasoning is kind of about problem-solving capacity, the ability to see how things link together. Now, one of the things that we know is that there's a strong correlation between these 3 things. If you average a person's abstract, numerical, and verbal reasoning scores, you end up with a thing that's called general intelligence. The second is personality, and what we looked at there was the Leon Ashton model of personality, which is called the hexacone, and you'll see that there are 6 personality characteristics here. Honesty, humility is all about being honest and truthful and not arrogant. Emotionality is about being emotionally stable and emotionally unstable. Extroversion is about being optimistic and socially orientated, a sort of a person who likes people, and agreeableness is about being either angry or tolerant and easy to get along with. Conscientiousness is about being hardworking and organised, and openness to experience is kind of about being broad-minded. People who are open to experience tend to like new things. Then we use the Schwartz model of values. Shalom Schwartz is one of the most important researchers in the world in values, and he identified 10 individual values which are in 4 general areas. And the 4 general areas are conservation, which is about protecting what I've got; self-enhancement, which is kind of getting along in life and getting ahead; openness to change, which is about being interested in new things; and self-transcendence. That's really about trying to make the world a better place. People who are self-transcendent tend to be interested in things like social justice or environmental sustainability, trying to make the world a better place, or even just helping people at a local level. Now, values are very different from cognitive ability or from personality. Cognitive ability and personality have a strong genetic component to them. Values are largely learned in the course of life. So the cognitive ability and personality kind of suggests that there would be a almost genetic tendency to be either tolerant or intolerant, whereas values really says that your upbringing may cause you to be more tolerant or intolerant. Now, how did we measure tolerance? We used an instrument called attitudes towards diversity. Attitudes towards diversity measures the degree to which people are tolerant from a range of points of view. So in our measure of attitudes towards diversity, we measure gender, ethnicity, age, and disability. So gender is, are you sexist? Ethnicity is, are you racist? Age is all about the fact of being ageist, and disability is about the degree to which people are comfortable or are uncomfortable in working with people with disability. So the model is as follows. You're measuring people's attitudes towards diversity, which indicates their tolerance or intolerance, and then you're looking at their cognitive ability, their personality, and their values to see if you can predict whether people are likely to be tolerant or intolerant based on those results. So let's have a look at the results. Firstly, we'll start with the social dominance pathway. And the concept of the social dominance pathway is that people are intolerant because they consider themselves to be superior in some way. We are socially dominant. Me and my in-group are socially dominant. Now, we measured a whole bunch of psychological constructs here, including personality, cognitive ability, and values. And we've really just shown you the ones that were statistically significant. So these correlations, you'll notice that the bulk of them are negative. And what that means, so you'll see sincerity there. Low sincerity means high intolerance. Low greed avoidance means high intolerance. Low modesty means high intolerance. Now, those three characteristics are characteristics of a thing called honesty, humility, and they indicate the likelihood to be truthful, honest, and straightforward. You also notice that there's an asterisk against modesty because the correlation, the negative correlation between modesty and intolerance is extremely high, which suggests that people who are arrogant are far more likely to be intolerant than people who are inclusive. As well as that, it was theorized in the social dominance pathway that universalism, which is a value, would be low in people who are intolerant. Now, universalism is all about, I want to make the world a better place. So that's confirmed. The social dominance pathway is confirmed in this large sample. The second pathway was the ego threat pathway, which says that people who are intolerant may well be people who are kind of self-doubting and who find the differences of other people to be some way a threat to their own self-image and their own ego. So you'll see that we have a strong correlation between social self-esteem and intolerance. And what that means is that people who are intrinsically self-doubting, in other words, social self-esteem is, I don't really think people like me that much. What that's saying is that people who are like that are people who are more likely to be intolerant. Also, social boldness, which means I am a confident person interpersonally. When that's low, people are much more likely to be intolerant. And sociability. People who are more likely to be intolerant are people who actually don't like to interact with people very much. The third pathway is a conservatism pathway, and conservatism being that people who are not very open-minded are much more likely to be intolerant. So the three characteristics that you see here, aesthetic appreciation, inquisitiveness, and unconventionality, they are three personality characteristics which are part of a personality dimension called openness to experience. People who are open to experience are the sort of people who are broad-minded and like new things. So when people are low in this characteristic, in other words, they tend to be more closed-minded, they're much more likely to be intolerant. And also from a values point of view, security and tradition are values which are all about keeping things safe and keeping things similar to what they were in the past. Once more, the conservatism pathway is supported by the evidence that we gathered. Finally, the low cognitive complexity pathway says people who are relatively closed-minded and frankly not very smart are much more likely to be intolerant. And so the low cognitive complexity pathway says that people just don't like the idea that people who are different from me could be as good as I am, or better, or smarter, or whatever. They want a simple interpretation of the world, and in fact, this is evidenced once more by virtue of the low scores in openness to experience. Aesthetic appreciation, inquisitiveness, and unconventionality suggests a closed-minded kind of approach, which would indicate a preference for simplicity. But also you see these scores, low cognitive ability, particularly verbal ability, correlates strongly with a tendency to be intolerant. So what does all this mean in practice? Well, there are two really important things. One is that you can directly measure attitudes towards diversity with an attitudes towards diversity scale, and you'll see that this individual here is high on gender, ethnicity, age, and disability risks, so they are likely to be intolerant. But in addition to that, if you're psych testing them, you can see that this person's risk summary overall is negative because there are 5 high risks in amongst their profile, suggesting that they may be likely to be intolerant. So psych testing can cause you to have a more tolerant and inclusive workforce, but of course there's leadership involved in this as well, isn't there? If you lead your staff by demonstrating attitudes of inclusion and welcoming of diversity, then that's more likely to cause them to act in the same way, and especially if you communicate that that's the type of organisation we are. If you'd like to find out more about any of the products that we've identified or the research that we've shown you in this video, click on the link near this video to do so.